"This letter," she spat, the paper trembling in her thick ring-adorned hand, "is your final warning, Mr. Miller. Your so-called farm is in violation of covenants you're not even smart enough to know you're bound by. We're fining you $5,000 for that unapproved structure." Her eyes, small and hard like ball bearings, flicked to the magnificent 100-year-old barn my grandfather had built. "And if that dilapidated eyesore isn't demolished in 30 days, the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association will do it for you and send you the bill, along with a lien against your property." I stood on my side of the freshly staked property line, the smell of cut grass and diesel from the surveyor's truck thick in the humid air. Her name was Karen, of course it was, and she was the president of the HOA that bordered my 15 acres of heaven. Her floral muumuu was stretched taut over a frame that spoke of a lifetime of asserting dominance from a seated position, likely behind a desk or in a golf cart. She looked at my land, my legacy, like it was a stain she was duty-bound to scrub from the earth. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, a cold stillness settled over me, the kind I'd learned in places where laughter gets you killed. I looked from her furious, entitled face to the surveyor packing up his tripod, a hired gun who wouldn't meet my eye. This wasn't a dispute, it was a declaration of war. They were standing on the edge of their manicured world, trying to dictate terms to a man standing on ground paid for with the sweat and blood of his family, ground that had absolutely nothing to do with their little kingdom of beige houses and identical mailboxes. She thought she was holding a letter. I knew she was holding a lit fuse. She had no idea how short it was or what was on the other end. Before I tell you how I dismantled her entire corrupt empire with a single well-placed phone call, do me a favor. If you believe in property rights and standing your ground, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. And I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and share your own HOA nightmare. It's important for people to know they aren't alone in these fights. Now let me take you back to how this all began. Long before Karen decided my grandfather's barn needed to die. It started not with a bang, but with a piece of paper, a quiet act of love from a man I barely knew. My grandfather, Thomas Miller, was a man of few words and even fewer departures from his land. He'd bought these 15 acres outside of town back when the nearest neighbor was a mile away, and the only whispers you heard were the actual pines, not the gossiping residents of a future subdivision. He passed when I was on my second tour in Afghanistan, leaving me everything he had: the land, the sturdy but neglected farmhouse, the cavernous barn filled with the ghosts of harvest past, and a short, handwritten note that said, "Don't let them pave it, Jack. It's yours now." I came home a year later, a retired Army Corps of Engineers major with a quiet mind and hands that needed work to keep the memories at bay. The city had grown, creeping right up to the edge of the property. Where there was once empty fields, there now stood Whispering Pines Estates, a sprawling community of identical two-story homes with perfect lawns and an oppressive sense of conformity. My land was the last holdout, an island of rustic authenticity in a sea of prefabricated suburbia. It was perfect. I bought a used but clean 30-foot travel trailer and parked it near the old oak tree, planning to live in it while I brought the farmhouse back to life, board by board. It was my mission, my therapy. The first few months were bliss. I spent my days clearing brush, assessing the farmhouse's foundation, and just walking the property line, breathing air that didn't taste of sand and regret. I was methodical, just like the Army taught me. I drew up plans, created budgets, and sourced reclaimed lumber. The barn was my headquarters, its vast open space perfect for staging materials and sheltering my truck. I felt my grandfather's presence in the worn axe handles and the faint smell of hay that clung to the rafters. This wasn't just a project, it was a promise. The first love letter, as I came to call them, arrived about 3 months in. A crisp white envelope with the HOA's pretentious logo, left not in my mailbox but tucked under the wiper blade of my truck. It was a notice of violation for an unapproved temporary dwelling, my trailer. It cited a covenant number and demanded its immediate removal. I chuckled, tossed it onto the passenger seat, and went back to work. I wasn't a member. Their rules were as relevant to me as the weather on Mars. A week later, another one appeared. This time it was for excessive vegetation height. They were complaining about the wildflowers in my meadow. This one was accompanied by a grainy photo of my property taken from a distance. A little creepy, but still amusing. I started a small pile of them on the dashboard of my truck. Then came the notice about unlicensed commercial activity because I had sold a few cords of firewood from a deadfall tree to a local guy. They were watching me, closely. The amusement began to curdle into annoyance. I finally decided to put a stop to the nonsense. I drafted a polite but firm letter. In it, I stated clearly that my parcel, identified by its county tax ID, was not and had never been part of the Whispering Pines development. I included a copy of my deed in a printout of the county plat map, which clearly showed a thick, black line separating my property from their jurisdiction. I sent it via certified mail to the HOA's official address. Return receipt requested. I figured that would be the end of it. A simple misunderstanding cleared up by facts and legal documents. I had severely underestimated the belligerent stupidity of unchecked power. The response came not in the mail, but in person. It was my first meeting with Karen. She rolled up to my property line in a golf cart that had President emblazoned on the front in gold cursive lettering, my certified letter clutched in her hand. She didn't get out. She just sat there glaring as if my very existence was a personal affront. "Mr. Miller," she called out, her voice carrying an imperial tone, "we received your little letter. It changes nothing." That was the moment I knew this wasn't about rules. This was about control. This was about a woman who couldn't stand the sight of something she didn't own, couldn't regulate, couldn't bend to her will. The war had begun, and she had just fired the first real shot. The fines started arriving like clockwork, delivered by certified mail to the post office box I'd set up in town. Each envelope was a little jolt of bureaucratic venom, a testament to Karen's relentless obsession. The initial $5,000 demand for the barn's existence was just the opening salvo. A week later, another letter arrived, this one tacking on a $2,000 penalty for improperly stored construction materials, complete with a zoomed-in, blurry photo of the reclaimed oak beams I had carefully stacked on pallets inside my own barn. It was followed by a $1,000 fine for unauthorized agricultural activity, which referred to the small vegetable garden I'd planted behind the farmhouse, a garden that was a good 200 yards from her precious kingdom of chemically treated lawns. The absurdity was staggering. I was being fined for improving my own property, on my own land, by an entity that had zero legal authority over me. It felt like getting a speeding ticket from the King of England while driving in Ohio. The total was climbing at an alarming rate, a mountain of imaginary debt designed to intimidate and crush. With each letter, her language became more aggressive, more threatening. Phrases like further legal action, forced compliance, and accruing daily penalties were scattered throughout. It was a masterclass in weaponized paperwork. I sent a second letter, this time addressed to the entire HOA board, not just the generic post office box. I reiterated my legal position, again providing the deed and plat map. I warned them that their continued harassment constituted tortious interference and that any attempt to place a lien on my property would be met with immediate and severe legal consequences. I even had my old JAG buddy from the service give it a once-over to make sure the language was sufficiently intimidating. I expected this to give them pause, to force them to consult an actual lawyer who would tell them they were playing with fire. Instead, it seemed to pour gasoline on Karen's bonfire of rage. Her response was a masterpiece of pseudo-legal gibberish. She wrote back personally, claiming the HOA held a historical prescriptive easement over my entire property, granting them oversight on all matters of aesthetics and land use. It was a term she'd clearly found on the internet, a legal concept so wildly misapplied it was laughable. A prescriptive easement is earned through long-term open use of a property, like a path people have used for decades. It doesn't give a neighboring subdivision the right to tell you what color you can paint your barn. She was just making things up, throwing legal-sounding words at the wall to see what would stick. The fines now totaled over $15,000. Alongside the official notices, the passive aggression escalated. I'd find her golf cart parked at the edge of the development, just sitting there, Karen staring at my property through a pair of binoculars, like a portly general surveying enemy territory. Sometimes one of her board cronies, a thin, nervous man named Gerald, would be with her, nodding along to whatever she was pointing at. They weren't just sending letters, they were conducting surveillance. The stress began to seep into the quiet joy of my project. Every time I heard a vehicle slow down on the road, I'd glance up, wondering if it was her. The peace I'd come here to find was being eroded by this woman's petty tyranny. But if there's one thing the military teaches you, it's how to deal with a determined enemy. You don't get emotional, you get organized. I was no longer amused or annoyed. I was activated. I went to the local office supply store and bought a thick 3-ring binder, a set of dividers, and plastic sheet protectors. My mission had a new objective. Operation Deconstruct Karen. I created a file. Every letter she sent was cataloged, dated, and placed in a protector. I printed out the delivery confirmations from my certified mail. I started a log documenting every time I saw her or her golf cart near my property, noting the date, time, and duration of her surveillance. I took my own photos, wide-angle shots that showed my entire property and the clear, demarcated boundary with whispering pines. I photographed my neatly stacked lumber, my thriving garden, and the structurally sound, beautiful barn she wanted to tear down. I was building a case, brick by brick, document by document. I was turning her weapon, paperwork, against her. She was fighting a war of emotion and ego. I was preparing for a war of evidence and law. She thought she was burying me in paper. She had no idea I was building a ladder out of it. And the first place I was going to climb was the county records office. She had invented a historical prescriptive easement. I was going to go find the actual history. I was going to pull every single document related to her, HOA and my land, and I was going to find the truth she was so desperately trying to bury. The quiet satisfaction of my new mission was a familiar feeling. It was the calm before the assault, the meticulous preparation that ensures victory. The binder felt heavy and important in my hands. It wasn't just a collection of documents. It was a weapon waiting to be aimed. The county records office was a quiet, dusty sanctuary of facts, a place where Karen's blustering falsehoods couldn't survive. The air smelled of old paper and microfilm, a scent I found immensely comforting. For 3 straight days, I became a fixture at one of the long wooden tables, my binder open, my laptop humming. I wasn't just looking for a single document. I was reconstructing the entire history of Whispering Pines Estates and its relationship to my family's land. I started with the basics, pulling the original 1998 master plan for the development. There it was in black and white, clear as day. Parcel 7B, my 15 acres outlined with a thick border and marked excluded, not subject to covenants. My grandfather had clearly made his intentions known from the very beginning. The developers had built their entire community around his property, a hole in their donut of control. This document alone was enough to obliterate Karen's legal claims in any sane courtroom, but I knew I was not dealing with sanity. I needed more. I needed to understand her motive. This level of obsession wasn't about my slightly too long grass or my vegetable garden. It was about something bigger. I dug deeper, pulling the HOA's original charter and bylaws. I read every tedious line about lawn maintenance, fence heights, and the all-powerful Architectural Review Committee. It was a blueprint for a suburban dictatorship, with the HOA president wielding enormous discretionary power. Then I started pulling the minutes from the HOA's monthly board meetings, going back 5 years. Most of it was mind-numbingly dull, disputes over unapproved satellite dishes and arguments about the color of someone's trim. But as I got closer to the present day, a theme began to emerge. The finances, property values, the need for community enhancement projects to attract premium buyers. And then about 6 months before I received my first letter, I found it. A reference in the meeting minutes under new business. Discussion of Parcel 7B acquisition strategy. There was no detail, just that one cryptic line item. My stomach tightened. This was premeditated. My arrival was not the cause of this conflict. It was merely an obstacle to a pre-existing plan. My blood ran cold, but my focus sharpened. I switched from the property records to the county planning and zoning department database. I started searching for any applications or inquiries related to my parcel number. It took some digging, cross-referencing dates from the HOA meeting minutes, but then it popped up on my screen, a digital bombshell. It was an application for a preliminary zoning change, filed 3 months ago by Whispering Pines HOA on behalf of Prestige Living Solutions. The application sought to rezone my 15-acre parcel from rural residential to high-density multifamily. It included a conceptual site plan that showed my farmhouse and barn replaced by 3 4-story condominium buildings, a swimming pool, and a clubhouse. My grandfather's land, my home, paved over for luxury condos. The rage that washed over me was cold and pure. They weren't just harassing me, they were actively, secretly trying to steal my land's future, to rezone it out from under me before they even owned it, likely to make it easier to acquire through some eminent domain-style legal maneuver or simply to pressure me into selling. Prestige Living Solutions. The name sounded as slick and soulless as the condos they planned to build. I spent the rest of the day researching them. They were a mid-sized regional developer with a reputation for aggressive tactics and a portfolio of bland, upscale housing projects. Their CEO had a smarmy smile and a history of cozy relationships with local planning boards. It all clicked into place. This wasn't Karen's personal vendetta. This was a coordinated effort between a greedy developer and a power-hungry HOA president. Karen got to play queen and deliver the property, and Prestige Living would get their prime real estate. The fraudulent fines, the harassment, the made-up easements. It was all a campaign to force me out, to make me so miserable I'd sell cheap just to escape her. They probably saw an absentee owner, figured they could get the zoning change, and then swoop in and condemn the property or buy it for pennies on the dollar from some heir who didn't care. My arrival, my decision to live here and restore the place, had thrown a wrench in their multi-million-dollar machine. I carefully printed every document, the original master plan, the HOA meeting minutes referencing the acquisition strategy, the complete zoning change application with the condo site plan, and the corporate filings for Prestige Living Solutions. My binder was getting thick. It was no longer just a defensive file, it was an indictment. I walked out of the records office that evening, the sun low in the sky, feeling a grim sense of purpose. This was bigger than a petty dispute. This was a conspiracy. Karen wasn't just a bully, she was a predator, and I knew exactly how to hunt a predator. You don't charge at it head-on. You learn its habits, you find its allies, and you set a trap it can't see until it's too late. My next step wasn't to confront her with what I'd found. It was to find her other victims. A predator like Karen never has just one. My campaign to build a coalition began subtly. I knew that directly approaching residents of Whispering Pines to talk badly about their HOA president could backfire. Fear makes people loyal, or at least silent. I needed a different approach. I started with the most visible sign of defiance in the entire subdivision, a perfectly crisp American flag flying from a 21-foot flagpole in the front yard of a corner house. In a neighborhood where every blade of grass seemed to be regulated, this bold display was an anomaly. I timed my approach for a Saturday morning when I saw a man in his late 50s with a military-style haircut, meticulously polishing the base of the pole. I parked my truck across the street and walked over, keeping my posture relaxed and non-threatening. "Morning," I said. "That's a fine-looking flag." He looked up, his eyes wary at first. Then he took in my bearing, the way I stood. It's a thing veterans can spot in each other from 100 yards away. "Morning," he replied, his voice a low gravel, trying to keep it that way. "I'm Jack Miller. I own the old farm property just over that rise," I said, gesturing with my thumb. His eyes lit up with recognition and a bit of sympathy. "Ah, you're the guy she's trying to fine out of existence." "That's me," I said with a wry smile. "Heard she's not too fond of your flagpole either." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Dave. And yeah, according to Her Majesty, it's 1 inch too close to the sidewalk easement. Got a file of fines thick enough to stop a bullet." He tapped a folder sitting on his porch railing. "I was Navy. You?" "Army Corps of Engineers," I said. We shook hands, a silent understanding passing between us. "Listen, Dave," I said, lowering my voice slightly. "This is about more than a flagpole or my barn. I've been doing some digging. I think she's trying to get my land for a developer. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. He'd suspected it too. That woman would sell her own mother for a kickback, he grumbled. What have you got? I didn't show him my whole hand, not yet. I just told him about the zoning application. That was enough. His face hardened. That's not just a violation of the bylaws, that's fraud. The board never voted on filing a zoning application for land we don't own. He invited me onto his porch. For the next hour, we compared notes. His story was a mirror of mine, just on a smaller scale. Fines for things that weren't violations, rules invented on the spot, constant targeted harassment ever since he'd refused to take down the flagpole she'd deemed jingoistic. Dave became my inside man. He knew the community, he knew who was trustworthy, and he knew who else was on Karen's list. Our next recruit was Maria, a sweet, elderly widow in her 70s whose front garden was her entire world. Karen was waging a war against her collection of ceramic garden gnomes, fining her for unapproved lawn ornaments. When we approached Maria, she was in tears, holding a letter demanding $500 because a gnome was allegedly visible from the street. Dave explained who I was, and I gently told her that we were fighting back. I told her we believed Karen was misusing HOA funds and targeting vulnerable residents. The fear in her eyes was slowly replaced by a spark of hope. She told us about how Karen had tried to get her to sign a document giving the HOA first right of refusal if she ever sold her house, an illegal addendum to the covenants. She had refused, and the no more had begun a week later. Our little band of rebels was growing. The final key members were the Chens, a young couple with a 9-year-old son who used a wheelchair. They had submitted a plan to the Architectural Review Committee to build a simple, tasteful wooden ramp to their front door. Karen had personally vetoed it, calling it aesthetically displeasing and suggesting they just use the garage entrance. The garage was at the back of the house, meaning their son would have to wheel himself around the entire property on a narrow, uneven path just to get to the front yard to play with his friends. It was cruel, unnecessary, and a clear violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. When we met with them, Mr. Chen, a quiet but fiercely intelligent software engineer, had already consulted a lawyer and was preparing to sue. He had documented every email, every phone call, every dismissive comment from Karen. He was, in his own way, as methodical as I was. We held our first official meeting in my barn. The four of us, Jack, Dave, Maria, and Mr. Chen, huddled around a makeshift table made of plywood laid over sawhorses. It felt like a scene from a Revolutionary War movie. I laid out my entire binder, all the evidence I had collected, the plat maps, the meeting minutes, the zoning application, the research on prestige living solutions. As I walked them through it, the mood in the barn shifted from shared frustration to cold, focused anger. They saw it wasn't just a series of isolated bullying incidents. It was a pattern, a conspiracy. Karen was using the HOA as her personal fiefdom to enrich herself and a corporate partner, and she was willing to crush anyone who stood in her way. "So what's the plan, Major?" Dave asked, the military honorific slipping out naturally. He was looking at me, they all were, as their de facto commanding officer. "The plan," I said, tapping the binder, "is to give her enough rope to hang herself. She thinks I'm getting desperate. She thinks the fines are working. We're going to let her believe that. We're going to set a trap, and she's going to walk right into it, smiling." My eyes met each of theirs in the dim light of the barn. We were no longer just victims. We were an alliance, and we were ready to go on the offensive. With my new allies providing moral support and pooling their resources for a legal war chest, my first call was to a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a shark, a man named Marcus Thorne who specialized in real estate and property law and had a reputation for eviscerating arrogant developers and corrupt local officials. He was expensive, but as Dave put it, you don't go bear hunting with a switch. I booked a consultation and walked into his polished downtown office with my binder. He was a sharp-dressed man in his 60s with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He listened patiently for the first 10 minutes as I laid out the basics, a look of professional skepticism on his face. He'd seen 100 petty HOA disputes. Then I opened the binder. I showed him the deed and the plat map clearly excluding my property. I showed him the stack of fraudulent fines totaling over $15,000. I showed him Karen's letter inventing a prescriptive easement, a flicker of interest. Then I showed him the HOA meeting minutes referencing the Parcel 7B acquisition strategy. His eyebrows went up. Finally, I laid the zoning change application on his gleaming mahogany desk, the one filed by the HOA and Prestige Living Solutions to build condos on my land. Marcus Thorne leaned forward, the skepticism gone, replaced by the keen, hungry look of a predator that has just caught the scent of blood in the water. "Mr. Miller," he said slowly, picking up the application, "this is not an HOA dispute. This is a case of attempted fraud, conspiracy, and tortious interference with property rights. This is beautiful." He spent the next hour dissecting my evidence, his mind working at a speed that was dazzling to watch. He confirmed my suspicions. The zoning application was wildly illegal. Filing it without my consent and with the clear intent of devaluing my position was a textbook example of bad faith. He quickly looked up Prestige Living Solutions on his computer. "Ah, yes, Robert Vance, their CEO," Marcus said with a grim smile. "I've danced with him before. He likes to get small-town officials and HOA boards to do his dirty work, keeping his own hands clean. He finds a local tyrant like your Karen, promises them a taste, and lets them clear the field for him." Then he laid out the strategy. It was simple, elegant, and ruthless. "She thinks she's cornering you with these fine," he explained. "She expects you to fight back, to argue, to get angry. We're not going to do that. We're going to make her think she's winning. We are going to make her overplay her hand so badly that she incriminates herself and her developer partner in writing." The plan was this. I would send a carefully worded letter, drafted by Marcus, directly to the HOA Board of Directors, with a copy to their official registered agent. The letter would not be aggressive. It would be the letter of a man who sounds beaten. It would express confusion and distress over the escalating fines and the constant surveillance. It would mention that I was a veteran on a fixed income, just trying to restore my family's old home. This was to paint a picture of a sympathetic, vulnerable target. Then came the hook. The letter would state that I had heard disturbing rumors about a potential development on my property and that the stress of the ongoing conflict was becoming too much. The key phrase, which Marcus wrote himself, was, "While it would break my heart to give up my grandfather's land, I may be forced to consider selling if a fair and reasonable offer were presented. Before I explore listing the property publicly, I would like to formally inquire if the Whispering Pines HOA has an official position on these rumors or has any interest in acquiring the parcel themselves. All communications on this matter will be treated as confidential and without prejudice to my legal rights." It was a masterpiece of bait. The "without prejudice" clause was a legal shield, ensuring we weren't actually negotiating, while the rest of the letter was a siren song to Karen's ego. It told her that her tactics were working, that I was on the ropes and ready to capitulate. It invited her to put her illegal scheme into an official, written offer. "She won't be able to resist," Marcus said, a glint in his eye. "A bully like this, when they see their victims starting to kneel, they don't help them up. They kick them. She won't pass this up to a lowball offer, and she'll be so arrogant she'll put it all in writing." He was right. We drafted the letter that afternoon, and I sent it via certified mail the next morning. Then we waited. For 2 weeks, there was silence. I continued my work on the farmhouse, acting for all the world like a man preoccupied and worn down. I could still see Karen's golf cart at the property line, watching, but now I knew I wasn't the one being observed. I was the one doing the observing, waiting for the trap to spring. My allies were briefed on the plan, and they played their parts perfectly. Dave stopped arguing about his flagpole. Maria moved her gnomes to the backyard. The Chens put their ramp project on hold. We created a collective illusion of surrender. Then it arrived. A thick envelope, again by certified mail. It wasn't just from Karen. It was on official HOA letterhead, signed by her as president and co-signed by Gerald, her nervous crony, as treasurer. It was everything Marcus had predicted, and more. It was the smoking gun we needed, a formal confession disguised as a business proposal. The trap had been sprung. I took the envelope back to the barn, my hands steady but my heart pounding with a cold, thrilling anticipation. I sat down at my plywood table and slit the envelope open, not with my usual pocket knife, but with a letter opener Marcus had given me, a sleek, silver thing shaped like a miniature sword. For slaying dragons, he'd said. The letter inside was 3 pages long, written in the most condescending and self-important tone imaginable. It began by acknowledging my inquiry and stating that, yes, the board of directors had been proactively exploring options for the beautification and enhancement of the community's borders, which included my property. The first page was a long-winded justification of their actions, a litany of my supposed violations. It mentioned the dilapidated and unsafe barn, the unsightly trailer, and the negative impact on the property values of Whispering Pines. It was a performance for some imaginary judge, an attempt to build a case for their position. Then came the second page, the offer. My eyes scanned the paragraph, and I let out a short, sharp laugh. It was even more insulting than I had imagined. They were offering me $250,000 for all 15 acres. In a market where undeveloped land was going for at least $50,000 an acre, it was a slap in the face. But it was the justification that was the true gift. The letter stated that the offer price had been calculated by taking the fair market value of the raw land, which they generously appraised at $400,000, and then deducting the outstanding fines and fees, which they now pegged at a ludicrous $22,500, as well as a pre-calculated demolition and clearing cost for the barn and farmhouse, which they estimated at an astronomical $127,500. They were using their fraudulent fines and an imaginary demolition bill to slash their own offer by more than a third. They were admitting in an official document that the fines were not a tool for compliance, but a financial weapon to devalue my home. It was a written confession of extortion, but Karen, in her infinite arrogance, wasn't done. The third page was the kill shot, the part that would bring down not just her, but the entire house of cards. The letter concluded by stating that their offer was contingent on a swift, non-negotiable acceptance, because the HOA was already in the advanced stages of a partnership with Prestige Living Solutions to redevelop the parcel into a luxury condominium complex that will significantly benefit the entire community. She named the developer. She confirmed the condo plan. She had taken every secret, every piece of the conspiracy I had painstakingly uncovered, and laid it all out on official HOA letterhead, signed her name to it, and mailed it to me. She had just handed me a signed confession, co-signed by her treasurer, implicating herself, her board, and her developer partner in a scheme to defraud me. I sat back, the letter in my hand, and felt a profound sense of calm. The anger was gone, replaced by the certainty of the outcome. She had mistaken my strategy for weakness, my silence for surrender. She had walked into the cage, eaten the bait, and then obligingly locked the door behind her. I immediately scanned the entire letter and emailed it to Marcus. His reply came back in less than 5 minutes, a single line of text. Checkmate. I'll see you at the HOA meeting next Tuesday. Wear your uniform. The next HOA meeting, of course, a public execution. Marcus's plan was never just to win in court. It was to expose them, to humiliate them in front of the very people they claimed to represent. The homeowners of Whispering Pines, most of whom had no idea what Karen was doing in their name, were about to get a front row seat to her downfall. I spent the next few days preparing with my allies. Dave, Maria, and Mr. Chen were ecstatic when I showed them the letter. The fight was no longer just about their individual grievances. It was about reclaiming their community from a corrupt leader. Mr. Chen used his tech skills to create a simple, powerful presentation. Dave used his network to quietly encourage attendance at the next meeting, telling people there was a major financial announcement they wouldn't want to miss. Maria baked cookies, a disarmingly wholesome touch for the revolution we were about to start. On Tuesday evening, I went to my closet and took out my army dress blues. I hadn't worn the uniform since my retirement ceremony. The jacket was immaculate, the medals on the chest, the Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Medal, gleaming under the light. As I put it on, I wasn't just Jack Miller. the guy with the old farm. I was Major Jack Miller of the United States Army Corps of Engineers. I was representing a lifetime of discipline, honor, and service. Karen had attacked my home and my family's legacy. I was about to remind her and everyone else what it meant to fight a man who had sworn an oath to defend something much larger than himself. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about principle. The community clubhouse at Whispering Pines was packed, a standing room only crowd drawn in by Dave's discreet but effective rumor campaign. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and nervous anticipation. Most residents were there for the usual mundane drama, disputes over petunias or trash can placement. They had no idea they were about to witness the public dismantling of their leadership. I walked in with Marcus Thorne at my side, my dress blues cutting a sharp, authoritative figure through the sea of casual suburban attire. A hush fell over the room as people turned to stare. They knew who I was, the outsider, the subject of 1,000 gossipy conversations. Seeing me there, in uniform, with a lawyer who looked like he could foreclose on the entire neighborhood, sent a ripple of shock through the crowd. I spotted my allies, Dave standing tall near the back, Maria sitting in the front row with a group of her elderly friends, and the Chens near the side, their faces calm and resolute. We were a silent, coordinated force. At the front of the room, Karen sat at a long table with her board members. She saw me and a flicker of triumphant smugness crossed her face. She thought I was there to formally accept her insulting offer, to surrender in person. She whispered something to Gerald, the treasurer, who chuckled nervously and adjusted his glasses. She had no idea she was a dead woman walking. The meeting began with the usual tedious roll call and the reading of the previous month's minutes. Then Karen, beaming with self-importance, moved to new business. As many of you know, she began, her voice dripping with condescension, the board has been working diligently to resolve the ongoing code compliance issues with the adjacent non-member property. She gestured vaguely in my direction without making eye contact. We are pleased to announce that we have made significant progress and have extended a generous offer to acquire the parcel, which will allow us to finally beautify our community's western border and enhance all of our property values. A smattering of polite, confused applause broke out. She was framing the land grab as a community victory she had personally engineered. This was my cue. Before she could continue, Marcus Thorne stood up. "Madam President," he said, his voice calm but carrying the authority of a judge. "My client, Major Jack Miller, would like to address the board and the members of this association regarding that offer." Karen's smile faltered. This wasn't part of her script. "This is a closed board matter," she snapped. "There is no open forum for—" "On the contrary," Marcus interrupted smoothly, "your offer, made on behalf of this entire association, has massive legal and financial implications for every homeowner here. I believe they have a right to know what you've been doing in their name. Major?" I walked to the front of the room and stood at the podium, facing the crowd. I placed my binder on the lectern and opened it. My heart was a steady drum. I looked out at the faces. Curious, hostile, indifferent. "My name is Major Jack Miller," I began, my voice clear and steady. "For the last 6 months, your HOA president, Karen Peters, has been waging a campaign of harassment against me, levying over $20,000 in fraudulent fines." A gasp went through the room. "She has done this under the false pretense that my property, which has been in my family for over 70 years, is under her jurisdiction. It is not." I held up the oversized printout of the county plat map, the thick black line clearly separating my land. "This is the official county record. My property is, and always has been, excluded from Whispering Pines." I then turned to the next document. This campaign was never about my barn or my garden. It was about forcing me to sell my land cheap. 2 weeks ago, I received this offer from your board. I held up the letter. They offered me $250,000 for 15 acres of prime real estate, after deducting costs for their own fraudulent fines. Murmurs were turning into angry whispers. People were starting to look at Karen, whose face had gone from smug to pale. "But why would they want my land so badly?" I continued, my voice rising. "Because, as this letter also states, Your board has already entered into a partnership with a developer called Prestige Living Solutions to build a massive condominium complex on it. I clicked a button on a remote Mr. Chen had given me. On a projector screen behind the board table, the developer's conceptual site plan flashed up. The 3 condo buildings, the pool, the clubhouse, all sitting where my home was supposed to be. The room erupted. People were shouting questions, pointing at the screen, then at Karen. "We were never told about this," someone yelled. "What does this mean for our property values? For traffic?" Karen stood up, her face now a blotchy red. "This is a confidential negotiation. He has violated." "The only thing that has been violated, Madam President, is the law," Marcus boomed, stepping forward again, "and the trust of every person in this room. We have documentation showing that you, on behalf of the HOA, filed a zoning change application for a property you don't own, an act of fraud. You then used your position to levy illegal fines to extort a lower sale price. You have exposed this entire association to a multi-million-dollar lawsuit." In the back of the room, a man in a suit I didn't recognize, the developer's rep, stood up, his face ashen. He had clearly been invited by Karen to witness her triumph. The trap hadn't just caught her, it had caught him too. The beautiful, elegant public execution was complete. The developer's representative, a slick-looking man in his 40s named Donovan, did not hesitate. He saw a sinking ship, and his only instinct was to be the first one in a lifeboat. He held up his hands to quell the shouting, his face a mask of practiced sincerity. "On behalf of Prestige Living Solutions," he announced, his voice strained, "I want to make it clear that we were led to believe the HOA was in legitimate negotiations to acquire this parcel. Based on the irregularities that have been brought to light here tonight, Prestige Living is immediately and officially withdrawing our provisional development agreement. We will not be moving forward with this project." He didn't even look at Karen. He just gathered his briefcase and practically ran out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The $4 million development deal that Karen had built her entire scheme around had just evaporated in a single public sentence. Her primary motivation, the pot of gold at the end of her rainbow of tyranny, was gone. All that was left was the wreckage. Karen stared at the door Donovan had just fled through, her mouth slightly agape. The color had drained from her face, leaving it a pasty, doughy white. She looked like a statue of arrogance that had just been told it was made of sand. The homeowners, who a moment ago were a chaotic mob, now turned on her with a unified silent fury. The betrayal was palpable. She hadn't just been a bully, she had been a con artist, gambling with their money and their community's future. She sank back into her chair, looking small and defeated for the first time. But I wasn't finished. This wasn't just about stopping the development. It was about justice. It was about ensuring she could never do this to anyone ever again. I pulled out my phone. The room was so quiet that the sound of me tapping the screen was audible. I selected a number from my contacts and put the phone on speaker, placing it on the podium. A voice answered on the second ring, crisp and professional. "Major Crimes Division, Attorney General's Office. This is Major Albright." The use of his rank was a deliberate choice we had agreed upon. I saw Dave's eyes widen in the back of the room. He knew what that meant. "Major Albright, it's Major Jack Miller," I said, my voice resonating in the silent room. "We spoke last week." "Yes, Major Miller, I remember," the voice from the phone replied. "What can I do for you?" "The situation we discussed," I said, my eyes locked on Karen. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror. This was a fear that went beyond public humiliation. This was the fear of flashing lights and cold steel. "It's time. I am standing in the Whispering Pines clubhouse. I have in my possession, as do approximately 100 witnesses, documented evidence of what appears to be a conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, and extortion, perpetrated by the president of the Homeowners Association, Ms. Karen Peters, in collusion with a corporate entity." Every word landed like a hammer blow. Wire fraud for the emails, mail fraud for the certified letters containing the fines and the offer, extortion for the entire scheme. These were not civil infractions. These were federal crimes. "I have the documents right here," I continued calmly. including a signed offer letter that explicitly details the scheme. We also have multiple witnesses who have been subjected to similar patterns of harassment and financial threats. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear the gears turning in Major Albright's head. "Understood, Major Miller," he said, his voice now deadly serious. "Don't let anyone leave that room. Secure the documents. I'm dispatching 2 investigators right now. Their ETA is 15 minutes. I disconnected the call and looked at Karen. The fight was gone from her eyes. All that was left was a hollow, gaping maw of panic. Her crony, Gerald, the treasurer who had co-signed the letter, looked like he was about to be physically ill. He started inching his chair away from her, a rat deserting the captain of a ship he'd helped sink. The other board members were doing the same, their faces a mixture of fear and fury as they realized how badly she had exposed them. They had been rubber stamps for her tyranny, and now they were about to be caught in the blast radius. "Nobody is to touch the documents on this table," I commanded, my voice carrying the weight of my rank and the authority of the Attorney General's office. "This is now an active investigation." The next 15 minutes were the longest of Karen's life. The room was silent, save for the sound of Mr. Chen's wife comforting a crying Maria, who was overwhelmed with relief. Dave had moved to stand by the door, his arms crossed, a silent, imposing guard. No one was leaving. Then we saw them, the flashing blue and red lights of 2 unmarked sedans pulling up outside the clubhouse. 2 sharp-looking investigators in suits entered the room, their badges clipped to their belts. They conferred with me briefly. I handed them my pristine binder, and they then approached the board table. "Ms. Karen Peters?" one of them asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "We need you to come with us. There are some questions we need to ask you downtown." It was over. The war was won. Not with a shout, but with a phone call, backed by the unassailable power of meticulously organized truth. As they escorted a trembling, speechless Karen out of the room, past the glares of the neighbors she had tormented, I felt not triumph, but a quiet, profound sense of rightness. Justice. It wasn't an abstract concept. It was the click of a door closing on a tyrant's reign. The fallout was swift and spectacular. Karen's interrogation at the Attorney General's office, faced with the mountain of evidence from my binder, became a cascade of confessions. In a desperate attempt to save herself, she tried to pin everything on the developer and her own board, but the signed letter with her name on it was an anchor she couldn't cut loose. The investigators, armed with her statements and my documents, executed a warrant to seize the HOA's financial records and computers. What they found was even worse than we had imagined. The investigation quickly expanded beyond the attempted fraud against me. It turned out Karen had been running the HOA like a personal ATM for years. The fraudulent fines she levied against people like me, Dave and Maria, weren't just tools of intimidation. They were a source for a slush fund. She had been using the HOA's debit card for lavish dinners, spa treatments, and online shopping sprees, disguising them in the books as landscape maintenance or legal consultation fees. She had embezzled over $80,000 over a 5-year period. The conspiracy charge was the big one, but the sheer volume of petty graft and embezzlement painted a picture of a woman corrupted absolutely by a tiny amount of power. The entire board resigned in disgrace within a week. They weren't charged criminally, as the investigation showed Karen had kept them largely in the dark about the financial details, but their complicity and negligence made their positions untenable. The community was in shock, but also energized. An emergency election was held, and Dave, the Navy vet with the defiant flagpole, was overwhelmingly elected as the new HOA president. His first act was to call a special meeting where he formally and publicly apologized to me, Maria, and the Chen family. The second act was to pass a motion, which passed unanimously, to dissolve the hated Architectural Review Committee and replace it with a simple, common-sense set of guidelines that were ADA compliant. The Chens had their ramp approved the next day. The legal battle, however, was just beginning. Marcus Thorne, on behalf of myself, the Chens, and Maria, filed a massive civil suit. We didn't sue the HOA itself. These were our neighbors, and they were victims too. We sued Karen personally, along with the HOA's directors and officers insurance company, which provides liability coverage for boards. The insurance company, faced with the undeniable evidence of bad faith and criminal activity, was eager to settle rather than face a jury. Marcus was merciless in his negotiations. We weren't just seeking to recover the bogus fines. We were suing for damages related to harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and the ADA violations against the Chens. After a few months of legal wrangling, the insurance company folded. They paid out a significant six-figure settlement. After Marcus took his well-earned fee, the money was divided among us. I used my portion to accelerate the renovations on the farmhouse. Maria used hers to take her grandchildren on a trip to Disney World, a trip she'd always dreamed of but could never afford. The Chens put theirs into a college fund for their son. The settlement also required a formal, legal expungement of every fine and violation notice Karen had ever issued to us. Our records were wiped clean. As for Karen, her world had completely imploded. The criminal charges stuck. She pleaded guilty to wire fraud and embezzlement to avoid a lengthy trial. She was sentenced to 18 months in a low-security federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution for the money she had stolen from the HOA. The conviction meant she could never again serve on a board or hold any position of financial trust. The civil suit had bankrupted her, and the restitution order sealed her financial doom. The beautiful house in Whispering Pines, the source of her power and prestige, went into foreclosure. The final piece of justice came from the community itself. Under Dave's leadership, the HOA's covenants were completely rewritten. They were simplified, stripped of all the ambiguous, petty rules that allowed for subjective enforcement. The power of the president was dramatically curtailed, and new transparency rules were put in place, requiring all financial records to be posted online for residents to view at any time. They had gone from a petty dictatorship to a model of community governance. My property line, once a source of conflict, became a symbol of the new relationship. Dave and the new board had the original survey markers, the ones Karen's surveyor had trampled, professionally reset in concrete. They were no longer a line of division, but a respected boundary, a permanent reminder of where their authority ended and my rights began. The war was over, every battle won, every objective achieved. The enemy was vanquished, the territory was secure, and the allies were safe. All that was left was to rebuild. Months melted into a peaceful, productive rhythm. The settlement money allowed me to hire a small, skilled crew of carpenters, and the restoration of the farmhouse accelerated dramatically. New windows went in, the old floors were sanded and refinished to a warm luster, and the walls were painted in colors that seemed to pull the sunlight into the rooms. The house was coming back to life, shaking off the dust of decades of neglect. My trailer, the original casus belli of Karen's war, was cleaned out and sold to a young couple starting their own adventure. I moved into the partially finished house, sleeping on a mattress on the floor of what would become the master bedroom, the smell of fresh paint and sawdust a comforting perfume. The barn, my fortress of solitude and war room, was transformed as well. I had it rewired, installed new lighting, and built out a proper workshop in one corner. The rest of its cavernous space was left open, a cathedral of timber and history. It was no longer just a place to store things. It was a place to gather. To celebrate the victory and the new sense of community, I decided to host a barbecue. I sent out invitations to everyone in Whispering Pines, not just my allies, but the entire neighborhood. I wanted to formally turn the page, to replace the memory of conflict with a new memory of friendship. The day of the party was perfect, a warm Saturday in early autumn. I set up long tables in the meadow between the house and the barn. The grill was smoking, music was playing, and kids were running through the tall grass that Karen had once deemed a violation. It was a picture of everything she had hated, and it was beautiful. Dave, Maria, and the Chens were the guests of honor. Dave and I stood by the grill, flipping burgers, two old soldiers enjoying the peace we had fought for. Maria was showing off pictures of her Disney trip to a rapt audience of neighbors, her face radiant with joy. Mr. Chen was pushing his son in a swing we had hung from a thick branch of the old oak tree, the new ramp on his house visible in the distance. People who had once looked at my property with suspicion, poisoned by Karen's gossip, now walked up to me with open smiles. They complimented the house, admired the barn, and thanked me. We had no idea, one woman said, her voice full of regret. She told us you were trying to build some kind of junkyard. We're so sorry. That's all in the past, I said, shaking her husband's hand. Today is about being neighbors. It was in the middle of this perfect scene that I saw it. A drab, brown moving truck was parked on the street in front of Karen's old house. A crew of movers was listlessly carrying out boxes and furniture. And there on the curb stood Karen. She looked diminished. The imperious posture was gone, replaced by a weary slump. Her fancy clothes were gone, replaced by nondescript sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. Her face was puffy, her eyes vacant. She was watching the last remnants of her old life being hauled away. She must have felt my eyes on her, because she turned her head and looked across the lawns, across the street to my property. She saw the party. She saw the dozens of her former subjects laughing and eating on my land. She saw Dave, her replacement, standing beside me. She saw Maria, the woman she'd tormented over gnomes, holding court like a beloved queen mother. She saw everything she had lost and everything I had won. Our eyes met across the distance. For a long moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of us. I saw a flicker of the old hatred in her eyes, a spark of resentment that would probably never die. But it was weak, pathetic. I felt no anger, no desire for revenge. I had already won. Gloating would be a waste of energy. I simply held her gaze, and then I gave a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't a nod of forgiveness or of pity. It was a nod of finality, acknowledgement, an exclamation point at the end of a long and difficult chapter. She broke eye contact first, turning away to stare blankly at the moving truck. A few minutes later, a beat-up sedan pulled up, driven by a woman I didn't recognize. Karen got into the passenger seat without a backward glance and was driven away, disappearing from the neighborhood for good. Just then, Dave walked up and handed me a cold beer. "Good riddance," he said quietly, following my gaze. "Indeed," I replied, taking a sip. He then handed me a small flat box. "The new board wanted you to have this." I opened it. Inside was a simple, elegant brass plaque. It read, "In recognition of Major Jack Miller for his defense of property, principle, and community, with deepest thanks from your neighbors at Whispering Pines." I looked from the plaque to the party, to my restored home, and my grandfather's barn standing proud against the sky. The war was over. The peace had been won. My promise to my grandfather was kept. They would never pave it now. It was home.